Welcome everyone to this Privacy Rules, Privacy Espresso. Today we are with our expert, Yugo Nagashima from the law firm Frost Brown Todd. Yugo is based in Washington, D.C. and will be happy to provide you with any assistance in relation to privacy, but also IP and technology, as he is an expert in the field. And we have invited him today to discuss what's happening on privacy at the federal level in the United States. There have been some news from there, so we all would like to know a bit more. And I think that Yugo is exactly the most appointed person for this. So Yugo, thank you very much for being with us. And my first question today to you is, what's happening? What's the news coming from the US at the federal level?
Hi, Alessandro. Thank you so much for inviting me. And yes, there are some new developments in the United States, especially in the federal level. So just in the past 2 months, there's been 2 legislations, one Democrat, one Republican, introduced to the Senate. Let's start with the Republican one. The Republican proposal is by Senator Roger Wicker, and it's a little long. Setting an American framework to ensure data access, transparency, and accountability act. So if you take the acronym, so if you take the first letter and you take the initials, it becomes Safe Data Act. So we call it Safe Data Act, and I'll just refer it to Safe Data. The other one by the Democrats is proposed by Senator Maria Cantwell, Washington State, and it's a little shorter, Consumer Online Privacy Rights Act. And we'll refer to it as COPRA. And these 2 legislations are relatively similar, but yet there's some differences that reflects the political ideologies of the parties. But basically, it is very uniform in terms of accountability requirements, transparency requirements, privacy rights to individuals, which includes right to access, right to delete, purpose limitation, consent, and there's another aspect that's very US-centric, which is US doesn't have data protection authorities, but they have the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and both parties and both legislations propose that the enforcement authority of the Federal Trade Commission be strengthened.
Okay, that's extremely interesting, Yugo. Thank you very much for this brief overview. And speaking about the 2 proposals, let's say, are there some common privacy principles, and which are the fundamental privacy principles? And also, are there similarities with the CCPA and the GDPR that are other regulations that we already know, or they are completely different?
So the big picture, the big framework, as I mentioned, transparency, accountability, which is in the GDPR, CCPA, data minimization is part of it. There's also a requirement of data impact assessments, and also having a data privacy, or it's called privacy and data security officer, depending on which legislation it is, but it's similar to the concept of the DPO. That's all part of the legislation. In terms of some of the differences, I would say the safe data, which I will talk more in detail later, it doesn't have a private right of action like the CCPA, for example. CCPA has one. So there are some differences, but I think overall, there's a general understood principle that is common across the GDPR, CCPA. And there's also the sensitive data definition. There is a sensitive data definition in the 2 proposed legislations, just like the GDPR, and just like, not the CCPA, but the CPRA has sensitive data definitions. The definition, however, in the federal legislation is a little broader, in that it includes email addresses, telephone numbers, financial accounts, account numbers, and items like that.
Okay, thank you very much. And that was also very interesting. There are always some common points in the various regulations, but we always have to focus also on the differences, in particular when we have to deal with many of them at the same time. And which are instead the main differences between the safe data and the COPRA proposals?
So there's 2 big differences, I would say. And let me tackle the first one. The first one has to do with a very American concept of preemption. And let me just briefly describe what preemption is. So in the United States, we have a federal government, the federal central government, and then we have the state governments like California and New York and Texas. And what preemption means is when there's a conflict between the state law. So let's say there's a conflict between the CCPA and let's say one of the legislations become law, and let's say, and the CCPA says do A, and the federal law says, no, do B. And you can't do both. What happens? So that's preemption. And preemption is you would go with the federal law. And in the SAFE data, the Republican proposal, that proposal says the federal law preempts. And if there's a state law, that does not control. In fact, it goes on to say that, the states can't really have a data privacy law. You have to follow the federal law. With the COPRA, the Democrat proposal, it's a little bit milder, in which is if there's a complete direct conflict, the federal law is preferred. So you would follow the federal law, but if there is no conflict, and let's say there is more protection with individual privacy rights, you would actually go with the state law. And the second point I wanted to get to is the concept of the private right of action. This is essentially an individual, let's say, a citizen filing a lawsuit on behalf of himself or herself for a federal privacy law violation. In the Safe Data Act, there is no private right of action. So it would just be, the FTC enforcing, as a regulator enforcing. But with COPRA, the Democrat proposal, you can have an individual bring a lawsuit. And further, the legislation also prohibits pre-dispute arbitration clauses, which means this opens up the door for class action suits where many people can join in one suit to file a lawsuit against a company who's not following the eventual federal privacy law.
Perfect. There is really a lot to discuss in relation to that, and that's extremely interesting. So thanks for bringing it here today. I have just one last question I would like to ask you today, is just still related to the US, of course, is if there is any other activity that the Congress or the federal government are taking in relation to privacy.
So there's two. One is there is bipartisan support. As you can see, the fundamentals are very similar. So on the Republican side, Senator Wicker sent a letter to President Biden saying, hey, we need a federal privacy law, and has outlined points that, for example, it's needed to protect the individuals from, cybersecurity and identity theft. It's also needed for small businesses to compete against big tech. The Democrats seem to agree with those points, but at the same time, they've actually sent a letter to the FTC, to the chair of the FTC, Lina Khan, to say, hey, start doing rulemaking. And rulemaking is making regulations at the FTC level to start enforcing privacy rights. And some experts in politics think this letter by the Democrats to the FTC chair suggests, well, is the privacy legislation, is one of them going to pass? We don't know, because it is a little odd that you would ask the executive branch to start making rules when in the legislative state there is no federal legislation yet. And I think Senator Wicker actually pointed it out. It's like, why are you going ahead with rulemaking when we have to first decide on what federal law to make? So I think this gives us a little bit of an understanding of the federal privacy law. Although it's been proposed, it might take a little longer to actually become law.
Of course, and but this is probably the way to go in order for the federal law to grow up and become possibly the best possible. Also to make a bit easier the life of privacy lawyers as you are. That have to deal with different laws every day. So we ran out of our time. So thank you very much, Hugo, for being with us today. It was extremely interesting to listen to you. I thank also our listeners for joining us, and I invite them to participate and join in the next Privacy Espressos in the next week. So thank you all and stay safe. Bye, everyone.